The marble chamber of the Supreme Court gleamed under the morning light, solemn and intimidating. Reporters filled the gallery, their pens ready, cameras humming silently, waiting for the clash they all sensed was inevitable. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp legal mind and fiery presence in congressional hearings, had been invited to speak in a special session about the interpretation of voting rights protections. It was unusual, almost unheard of, for a sitting legislator to be questioned directly by members of the court. But political winds had shifted, and the issue had become urgent. At the far end of the chamber sat Justice Neil Gorsuch, his expression calm, almost amused. He leaned forward slightly, adjusting his glasses, clearly prepared for confrontation. The moderator announced, "We welcome Representative Jasmine Crockett to present her arguments regarding equal access to voting protections under the Constitution." Crockett stood, her trademark confidence radiating. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, she looked more like a trial lawyer stepping into court than a politician. She carried a thick binder under her arm, but anyone who knew her also knew she rarely needed notes. "Thank you, Your Honors," she began, her voice steady. "We're here today because millions of Americans, working class, elderly, disabled, and disproportionately communities of color, continue to face manufactured obstacles to their most fundamental right, the right to vote." A murmur ran through the gallery. Crockett's tone was not timid, nor deferential, she was speaking with conviction, aware of the stakes. Gorsuch tilted his head. "Congresswoman," he interjected smoothly, "no one disputes the importance of voting. But surely you agree that states have an interest in maintaining the integrity of their elections. Some safeguards, what you call obstacles, are necessary to prevent fraud." Crockett's eyes narrowed slightly. She had anticipated this line of attack. "With respect, Justice Gorsuch, I agree that integrity matters. But what you're calling safeguards often function as barriers. When a 90-year-old woman, who has voted in every election for 70 years, is suddenly told her ID is unacceptable, we have crossed from protection into suppression." The audience stirred. Gorsuch leaned back in his chair, as though allowing her a little rope before tightening it. "And yet," he said, almost casually, "this court has consistently upheld the principle that states may regulate elections within reason. Would you suggest that the Constitution strips them of that authority entirely?" Crockett didn't miss a beat. "No, Justice. But I would suggest that this court itself has ruled, more than once, that state regulations cannot infringe on federally protected rights." Gorsuch smiled thinly. "Which ruling are you referring to, Congresswoman?" Reporters perked up. They recognized the tactic. He was trying to pin her down, to force her into a narrow legal corner. Crockett, however, calmly opened her binder, flipped to a bookmarked section, and read. "The Constitution does not permit the states to erect obstacles that functionally disenfranchise citizens under the guise of regulation." She looked up. "That's your writing, Justice Gorsuch. From Trinity County v. Lawson, 2018. You authored the majority opinion." The room went silent. Even some of the other justices turned slightly, watching Gorsuch's reaction. His polite smile flickered, replaced by the faintest tightening of the jaw. Crockett closed her binder. "So if we are to honor the precedent this court has already established, your precedent, then today's discussion is not about whether states may regulate. It is about whether states are abusing that authority to disenfranchise Americans. And your words, Justice, make it clear that such abuse is unconstitutional." Gasps rippled across the chamber. Gorsuch cleared his throat, but his usual composure seemed momentarily shaken. "Congresswoman," he said slowly, "I see you've done your homework." "I always do," she replied smoothly. The moderator tried to intervene, sensing the rising tension, but it was too late. The confrontation had electrified the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Commentators already imagined the evening headlines. Crockett turns Gorsuch's own ruling against him. And this was only the beginning. The tension in the chamber hadn't faded, it had only grown. Justice Neil Gorsuch adjusted the papers before him, a gesture meant to convey calm, but the subtle tightening around his mouth betrayed his irritation. Few ever dared to throw his own rulings back in his face. Fewer still did it so publicly, with such precision. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood poised, her eyes locked on him. It was no longer just a hearing, it had become a duel of intellects. "Well then," Gorsuch said, leaning forward again, his voice sharper now. If you're going to rely on my words, let us explore them further. In Trinity County, as you cite, I did say states may not erect functional obstacles. But I also emphasized that federal oversight must be carefully balanced against state sovereignty. Do you deny that balance, Congresswoman? The question was loaded, designed to corner her into admitting that federal protections could overreach. But Crockett did not flinch. She clasped her hands behind her back, taking a breath before replying. What I deny, Justice Gorsuch, is the notion that states can weaponize sovereignty to justify stripping citizens of their constitutional rights. Balance is important, but not when it comes at the expense of democracy itself. And once again, your own writings acknowledge this. Gasps rippled again. Reporters were practically vibrating with excitement. Every word was live tweeted, every pause analyzed. Crockett continued, her voice steady but forceful. In Hernandez versus Texas Board of Elections, you wrote, "The right to vote is the beating heart of our republic. No interest, however compelling, may justify procedures that deny access to that right for classes of citizens based on circumstance rather than conduct." Her gaze locked onto him like a trial lawyer delivering closing arguments. So tell me, Justice, how does forcing a veteran, confined to a wheelchair, to travel across 3 counties to reach a polling site reflect the principle you laid out? The chamber erupted. A few people in the gallery even clapped before being hushed. For the first time, Gorsuch looked unsettled. His hand went to his chin, tapping lightly as he sought a way to regain control. He finally said, "Congresswoman, you quote selectively. That same ruling also recognized the necessity of reasonable administrative burdens. The court has never denied that elections require structure. And neither have I," Crockett countered instantly. "But we both know there's a world of difference between structure and suppression. The law is not a weapon to protect power, it is a shield to protect people. And that shield is crumbling when those in power twist it into something it was never meant to be." The gallery was silent now, hanging on every word. The contrast was striking. Gorsuch, the seasoned justice, visibly unsettled, Crockett, the legislator, standing tall, unwavering. One of the other justices finally spoke. Representative Crockett, Justice Sotomayor said, her tone both curious and supportive, "Are you suggesting that this court has failed to uphold its own standards?" Crockett didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Honor. In some instances, this court has turned its back on precedent that Justice Gorsuch himself has authored. And when the court fails, it is the people who pay the price." The room fell into a heavy silence. Even Gorsuch did not immediately respond. He seemed to study her, as though reassessing his opponent. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter but edged with steel. "Congresswoman, it seems you've come here not just to argue law but to challenge the integrity of this court." Crockett met his stare head-on. "I came here to defend the people who can't afford the luxury of political games. If that defense looks like a challenge, then so be it. The Constitution belongs to them, not to politicians, not to judges, not to states seeking loopholes." The gallery burst into murmurs, and the moderator had to pound the gavel for order. The confrontation had already gone further than anyone had expected. And yet, Jasmine Crockett's voice rose above the noise, final and unshaken. "Justice Gorsuch, you asked me to balance federal protection with state sovereignty. I'll give you my answer in the same language you used. The right to vote is not a privilege the state may grant or withhold at will. It is a guarantee the federal government is bound to protect. That was your ruling, Justice. Your words. And today, I'm here to remind this court that America has not forgotten them." For a moment, the chamber was utterly still. Then, like a wave, reporters surged to capture every syllable of what had just unfolded. Judge Neil Gorsuch leaned back, expression unreadable. But in his silence, one thing was clear. Jasmine Crockett had not just met his challenge, she had turned it into a reckoning. The headlines that evening wrote themselves. Crockett shakes the Supreme Court. Gorsuch cornered by his own ruling. Voting rights debate erupts into legal firestorm. And in living rooms across America, millions watched replay after replay of a single unforgettable moment. Jasmine Crockett quoting Neil Gorsuch to Neil Gorsuch, and leaving him with no escape.